Thank you, and I begin my second innings now. I hope you're enjoying our little musical interludes in between. And I think music is very important uh, in medicine. And now I'm going to talk about something completely different, precision diabetes care, a practical perspective. And this will be a short presentation, and this will be the agenda of my presentation. So I begin by talking about what is precision case, what exactly is precision medicine, and secondly, what is precision medicine as it relates to diabetes? I will also look at precision medicine in modern times, the needle in a haystack, and the roadmap forward diabetes and the bucket list. So this is an editorial I wrote in the Indian Journal of Endocrinology and Metabolism just some time ago. I think it was just a few months ago. Those of you who've read Harry Potter, there's a school called Hogwarts. Those who are not used to Harry Potter, there's a school called Hogwarts School. And when children go to Hogwarts School, they have to wear a hat called a sorting hat. And once a child wears a sorting hat, the sorting hat actually talks to the child, and the child understands the child and assigns the child into one of the 4 houses in the school. It could be Gryffindor, it could be Slytherin, it could be so many of the other houses in the school. So type 2 diabetes is something like that. If it's not type 1, could it be type 2? Is the GAD antibody positive? No. Is it adult onset or young onset? So it's a little bit like that, but I think we need to go beyond that, and that's where precision medicine comes in. Now I've tried to break up the definition of precision medicine, the tailoring of medical treatment to the individual characteristics of the patient. It does not really mean creating drugs for that particular patient, but it means that you can classify patient groups to assign treatments. For example, somebody has a fatty liver and diabetes, what therapy you would like to give. And of course, this subpopulation clustering will help us to decide who will benefit from this treatment and who will not benefit from this treatment. So we are aware of 2 terms, precision medicine versus personalized medicine. So personalized medicine is very personal. You have treatments and interventions unique to that individual. Now that's not a precision medicine, but identifying certain patient characteristics and then assigning a treatment based on those characteristics or groups. That's what precision medicine is all about. So precision medicine is not a new concept. We've had blood transfusions and blood grouping. That's one of the earliest approaches towards precision medicine. And of course, spectacles, glasses is another example, and that's something like a personalized medicine. You have glasses personalized for your vision. So that's personalized and not precision. And of course, there are other such therapies as well. Now, why is precision medicine possible today? It's possible today because we have multiple biomarkers, innovations in bioimaging, and there is this Internet of Things, the wearable devices, which are together getting big data from medical records, and we are able to use that computational power to actually decide there are several groups and how to treat them. If all this is a little too much for you, I'll go back to something simpler. So there is you look at a disease group, and then you subclassify them, and then you use biomarkers to actually group people. Even in diabetes, precision medicine isn't a new term, because in 1939, we used to divide diabetes into insulin-sensitive and insulin-insensitive groups. Then we had MODY, maturity onset diabetes of young. And 1979, we started classification into type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And then we have, in 1996, we talked about latent autoimmune diabetes of the adult. I remember while I was working in the Banaras Hindu University, I published a paper on GAD antibodies in lean type 2 diabetes. That was almost 16 years ago that I studied that, and we found that some of these very lean people with type 2 diabetes actually had GAD antibody positivity, and that was associated with decreased insulin secretion as well. And to add to that, you have monogenic forms of diabetes, including both classical MODY and neonatal diabetes. Now the suggestion is that you omit the term MODY, maturity onset diabetes of the young. Doesn't mean much, but use the term monogenic diabetes, because if you use MODY, it refers to the age at onset. Now when we talk about maturity onset diabetes of the young, we are always thinking it could be at a young age, but we know monogenic diabetes can happen at any age. So I think there is a shift from MODY, the use of the word MODY, two monogenic forms of diabetes. So it's better to use the word monogenic form of diabetes. And I looked at what is precision medicine and the curious case of diabetes. Now I want to go back to Sherlock Holmes here. And this is an argument between Sherlock Holmes and an inspector called, it's not Lestrade, who's the usual inspector who features in Sherlock Holmes books, but it is another inspector called Gregory. So Gregory is a Scotland Yard detective, and they're trying to solve a case of a horse that went missing. So it's called The Adventure of the Silver Blaze. Silver Blaze is the name of the horse, and that horse went missing, and there was a dog somewhere nearby guarding the horse. So Gregory, who's the Scotland Yard detective, asks Holmes, is there any other point to which you would wish to draw my attention? And then Sherlock Holmes says, yes, I want to draw your attention to the curious incident of the dog in the night time. And then Gregory says, but the dog didn't do anything at night time. And then Sherlock Holmes says, that was a curious incident, because the very fact that the dog did not bark at night when the horse was being stolen means that the person who stole the horse is known to the dog. Otherwise, the dog would bark. So similarly, we always look at the presence of evidence in medicine, but we forget sometimes that we have to use our powers of exclusion when we study medicine. And there is this concept of exclusion as the way to deduction. So yes, when we say, and this is very inherent in Indian philosophy as well, you say na iti, which means in Sanskrit, not this, and you keep on excluding things till you reach the truth. Even Sherlock Holmes has said that if the truth, whatever, once you've excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable it is the answer. So type 2 diabetes is a little bit like that. We see a patient and we say, oh, this is not type 1. Could be type 2. But you see the GAD antibodies are negative. That favors type 2. It's adult onset, so that favors type 2. But we know that isn't true anymore. We know many people are now getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes requiring basal bolus insulin. Not in childhood, but even in adulthood, you can get type 1 diabetes. You can get it, for example, if I remember right, the former British Prime Minister Theresa May was on basal bolus insulin, and she was diagnosed to have insulin requiring kind of diabetes. So I think we need to ask the question, what is type 2 diabetes? Do we know what is type 2 diabetes? Are we saying that type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes are different forms of diabetes? Isn't diabetes one single disease with many forms? So we are now going back to asking this question, what really is type 2 diabetes? And to answer that question, we have to say that type 2 diabetes is a complex disease. It's a mixture of the seed and the soil. It's polygenic. And many of these genes, to date, there are more than 128 distinct signals at 113 loci which has been associated with type 2 diabetes. Majority of these are related to islet sensing, glucose sensing, islet synthesis. There are some genes related to signaling and resistance as well. There are, of course, others associated with metabolic traits such as obesity, which correlate with diabetes. So type 2 diabetes is heterogeneous, and there are many genes, and we cannot say that this one gene is responsible for type 2 diabetes unless we find that particular gene and say that gene and only that gene is a cause of diabetes. So then this study was done in a place called Skane, the Andes, and this is a population of this region in Europe is just over 1 million. All the newly diagnosed patients at all ages were included between the years 2009 to 2013. I'm standing on a small platform, but I need to get down from my high horse because I might fall off any moment, and I think you can all see me. So I think this is not a study which I did. This is a study done in Sweden, and this is in Europe. And last year, Dr. Leif Group, who came here, actually presented some of this data. And one of the aims was to describe the spectrum of diabetes subgroups in southern Sweden and link it. So a lot of people have registered in the study, and they looked at just 6 variables to subcluster diabetes. What were those variables? They looked at age at diagnosis, the body mass index, the HbA1c, the presence of islet antibodies like GAD antibodies. They looked at C-peptide. They looked at HOMA model for beta cell function and HOMA model for insulin sensitivity. And of course, they classify, we know that the American Diabetes Association classifies diabetes into 4 types. Type 1, type 2, pregnancy related, and other specific types. But these authors classify diabetes into 5 types. I'm not saying that we should, but these are the clusters. So you have severe autoimmune diabetes, you have severe insulin deficient diabetes, you have severe insulin resistance diabetes, then you have mild obesity related diabetes, mild age related diabetes. When I used to do my MBBS, my teachers used to say, Unni, there is nothing called mild. You can't have mild pregnancy. So you can't have mild diabetes. But we know that that's not true now because they have said, of course, you still can't have mild pregnancy, but you can have mild diabetes. That's suggested in this paper that you have mild obesity-related diabetes and mild age-related diabetes. What is the significance of this cluster? I will come to that in a moment. But as I said, on the left is a severe autoimmune diabetes, which is more or less like our type 1 diabetes. Second, you have severe insulin deficient diabetes, which is like the type 1 diabetes, which is non-autoimmune. And you can see this as high risk of retinopathy. So you need to follow these patients up for retinopathy. Mind you, this is done in a narrow group of people in one part of Europe. And I don't think these results are generalizable to the rest of the world. But I still think this research is worth presenting because it is really a new concept. And if we can do a similar study in India, a multi-center study, if all of us join together, I think it should be possible to look at that data. And then you have severe insulin resistant diabetes, and that's, insulin resistant, classical type 2, but maybe with an increased risk of nephropathy. And then you have MOD and MARD, mild obesity related and mild age related diabetes. Haven't we seen patients telling us, when I ask my patient, do you have a family member with diabetes? Then the patient will say, मुझे तो diabetes अभी हो गया, लेकिन मेरे पिताजी को तो old age में हुआ था. Like I developed diabetes now, but my father developed it when he was 70 or 80 years old. So we often see patients saying that. So I don't know if that mild age-related diabetes is so mild, but nevertheless it's worth looking at. So the severe autoimmune diabetes is associated with the HLA gene. The severe insulin deficient diabetes is associated with TCF7L2. Then you have the insulin resistant diabetes that is associated with obesity, but has a very unhealthy obesity. And there is fatty liver also. And there's a clear association with some genes. And of course, the mild obesity-related diabetes and the mild age-related diabetes, they don't show much chance of complications. They don't seem to be getting complications to that extent. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at diabetes landscape, this is type 2 diabetes here, this large gray part of the cake. But it's not really gray anymore. It's filled by a tapestry of rich colors. And you can see that it's so many different types of diabetes. The only thing that's remained the same is the type 1 diabetes, which is already there as severe insulin deficient diabetes. So what's the importance of this? The severe autoimmune diabetes, as you can see, it's got the HbA1c is very high. In the mild ones, the HbA1c is moderate. And of course, there are several differences. A GAD antibody is positive in the severe autoimmune diabetes. Insulin deficiency is important in autoimmune diabetes, and ketoacidosis is frequent both in the autoimmune forms and the non-autoimmune forms. But the most important is that the severe insulin deficient diabetes subjects seem to be at risk of retinopathy, and the severe insulin resistance diabetes seem to be at risk of nephropathy. And what can happen is, if you are looking at, India is a country where there are more than 74 million people with diabetes, and we are looking at what are the low-hanging fruits. Where should public health experts put their effort on? Where should they invest money so that you can prevent diabetes and treat diabetes? And to answer that question, the mild obesity and mild age-related diabetes, according to this publication, may not require much treatment. They can see a physician once a year and can be managed on metformin. And the other groups, we must spend time and effort on the other 3 groups. Is this validated in India? We don't know yet, but I think this is worth looking at. It's very difficult to remember, isn't it? SAID, SIDD, SIRD, MOD, MARD. So I was thinking, how can I remember it? Then I remembered my MBBS days where I used some mnemonics to remember difficult things. So I remembered that, Hindi film called Wake Up Sid. So there's a Hindi movie called Wake Up Sid, So I said, okay, wake up SID means SAID, SIDD, SIRD. All these things we have to wake up and be aggressive about treatment. And what about MOD and MARD? So I didn't see that movie, but there's a Hindi movie apparently called Mard Ko Dard Nahi Hota. I don't know, for people from abroad, it can be loosely translated as males don't feel pain, which is wrong. We also feel pain and we also cry. But at the same time, this is just an easy way to remember. I believe this Hindi movie is about somebody with a pain insensitivity syndrome or something like that. But I thought I'd use this mnemonic so that you can remember that wake up SID means you have to look at all the first three very carefully. And mard ko dard nahi hota means the mild age-related diabetes and mild obesity-related diabetes. Maybe we needn't be very aggressive. If an 89-year-old gentleman comes to you and has newly diagnosed diabetes, of course, some people believe that if you have newly diagnosed diabetes at a very old age, you need to do an ultrasound to look at whether it's a pancreatic neoplasm. But other than those rare situations, if somebody has got a classic type 2 diabetes at a very old age, well, there may be a case for more conservative therapy rather than going very aggressive. So we've looked at what is precision medicine. We've looked at what is precision versus personalized. I've also looked at precisely this is a curious case of diabetes where we are in a situation where we don't know what type 2 diabetes is, and we've just seen a classification which has cut down diabetes into 5 types. And now let's look at precision medicine in modern times, looking for a needle in a haystack. So I'm reminded of Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, and I've seen how technology, that's a beautiful illustration of how technology transformed our lives, partly for good, partly for the worse. And I'm also reminded of the proverb, looking for a needle in a haystack, which can be very difficult to find one cause of diabetes for each person. So let me go to a case now. This is a 4-month-old infant I saw some years back. The HbA1c is 7.9%. Of course, this child has a non-consanguineous parentage. The weight was 4.2 kilograms, 25th centile, and the length was 50th centile. Vitals were stable. There were no dysmorphic features. Rest of the examination was normal. Further, there was no ketonuria in this patient. She did not have ketones in the urine at all. And the fasting glucose levels were 156, and the postprandial glucose levels were 300. Structural diseases of the pancreas were ruled out by ultrasound abdomen. The GAD antibody and insulinoma associated antibodies were negative, and the C-peptide was 1, not extremely low. So what we did is we sent the sample to Dr. Hattersley's team in the UK, and we did the genetic tests at that point of time, and we found that the baby had genetic mutations in the potassium ATPase channel, and there was a heterozygous mutation in exon 29. Just to give you an idea, this baby is just 4 months old, so literally she was born with diabetes almost. So this is neonatal diabetes, and we found that there was a mutation which is a substitution for T for C, and when we tested the parents, we found that the mutation has risen de novo. So this was a case of permanent neonatal diabetes mellitus because of a mutation in ABCC8 gene. We published it in 2014. What is ABCC8? You have a sulfonylurea which binds to the sulfonylurea receptor. Again, I'm a clinician, not a molecular biologist, so I can only talk in very general terms. But what ABCC does is that helps to encode the sulfonylurea receptor in one form or the other. So the ABCC8 gene provides instruction for making the sulfonylurea receptor 1 protein, the SUR1. The SUR1 is one part of the ATP-sensitive potassium channel that is found across cell membranes in the beta cells of the pancreas. And beta cells, we know, secrete insulin. So what is that? What is the importance of this? The importance of this is that this 4-month-old infant can theoretically be treated by a simple sulfonylurea glibenclamide. And you can see this is a SUR1 which is encoded by the ABCC8 and which is important in insulin production. And initially, of course, this child was on NPH insulin, but once we got everything done, we started the infant. And again, I'm not a pediatric endocrinologist, but we started the patient on glibenclamide 2.5 milligrams per day, and the HbA1c we could stop insulin, and at the 9th month, the HbA1c was 6.8%, and the baby, the infant at the 9th month was on glibenclamide 3.75 milligrams per day, doing well. So the sulfonylurea commonly used in neonatal diabetes, if you've got a mutation positive, is glibenclamide at a high dose of 0.5 milligrams per kilogram per day. In our patient, the baby was switched over to 0.1 mg per kilogram per day, which was slowly titrated as per the protocol of Hattersley and Ashcroft. And when you compare with the classic mutations, this is the KIR2 mutations, the SUR mutation with this infant had needs a little lower dose of sulfonylurea and may represent that these infants may have some insulin secretion. So I think that these are all cases where you may get a single cause for diabetes. I also remember another neonatal diabetes case which we published. Now, this was also a newborn with diabetes. The mother said that as soon as the baby was born, whenever the baby passed urine, ants would used to accumulate near the urine. So we got the idea that the father of the baby was actually diagnosed as type 2 diabetes but required premixed insulin, and he had been taking premixed insulin for something like 10-15 years. And the baby also had diabetes. So when we did the mutation analysis, we found that the insulin gene mutation was, there was a mutation in the insulin gene, which means that the baby actually had a mutated insulin gene. And what happens when the insulin gene is mutated is that the folding of insulin gene gets altered. And because of that folding, the endoplasmic reticulum and the lysosomes together conspire to destroy that insulin, and the beta cell also gets apoptotic. And what we found is that the father of the baby also had the same mutation, and he has been taking insulin, premixed insulin, for so many years. Of course, I didn't show that case because they still require insulin. It's like type 1 diabetes because we could not stop insulin. But there may be a role in finding out a specific cause of diabetes. So mutations in the HNF1 alpha, we recently had a patient with HNF1 alpha mutation. He was, I think, a 20-year-old boy from Ratnagiri who was being treated with basal bolus insulin. So we sent the samples to CMC Vellore, and we found that the HNF genes were positive, and we are now analyzing the family further. Also, the glucokinase gene, there is a mild fasting hyperglycemia that really does not require treatment. And some of these patients with KCNJ11 mutation, and I show you the ABCC8, are extremely sensitive to sulfonylurea. There is still hope for type 2 diabetes diagnosis because type 2 diabetes is not a single origin disorder. There are 400 genetic variants. And you can find out a single gene disorder like GCK or HNF1 alpha only in a small proportion. Majority of patients have to be treated in groups. This group may respond to sulfonylurea, this group may respond to sensitizers, this group may respond to incretins. So the point I'm trying to make is precision medicine is not some glorified form of medicine that can be only done by doing genetic tests. You and I can actually look at the patient's history and examination and try to precisely apply it in our own day-to-day practice without going into some genetic test or some expensive test for our patients. I'll show you how. That's the roadmap forward, and I call it diabetes and the bucket list. It's nothing to do with the traditional bucket list, but I'm looking at classifying patients into subgroups. So one way to look at it is each bucket responds a group of patients who respond to a drug. For example, these patients with these genetic mutations may respond to metformin. These may respond to sulfonylurea. Somebody else may respond to pioglitazone. That's one way of looking at buckets. But I'm going to propose that you and I can do precision medicine in our own clinic, in a busy practice, if we find the time, by looking at bucketing patients into phenotypes. And what could be those phenotypes? It could be a long-standing diabetes patient with heart failure, for example. It could be a young biker with type 1 diabetes who may require an insulin pump therapy, or basal bolus insulin is of course required, but may require insulin pump therapy without CGM or at least CGM. So you may have an elderly lady with diabetes who requires if she's got type 2 diabetes, she may require a particular drug. Type 1 diabetes, she may require basal bolus insulin. So we have to look at age, diabetes duration, and comorbidities. So one way to look at is look on your right. So once we look at non-glycemic considerations and patient profiles, for example, if the presence of cardiovascular disease dictates that you give X therapy or Y therapy, once you decide that, Then you look at the glycemic consideration and say, okay, if this patient has got atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, I'd like to give a GLP-1. The patient has got a heart failure, I'd like to give an SGLT2, or I would like to just give diet, exercise, and metformin, which works in majority of patients. And diet and exercise itself can reverse diabetes in a lot of patients. So let's look at how we can practice precision diabetology in our own clinics. For example, if somebody is old, is frail, you do not want hypoglycemia, you could look at DPP-4 inhibitors, which age-specific goals. If somebody is obese, very obese, and you're struggling with treatment, you can look at bariatric surgery, GLP-1 agonists, SGLT2 inhibitors, and of course, diet and exercise goes without saying. If somebody requires a GLP-1, but he or she is not compliant, you might like to give once a week GLP-1 injection. If somebody has got a cardiovascular disease or is at high risk of kidney disease, you might like to give the patient a specific drug that targets cardiorenal risk. If somebody has high HbA1c and the oral drugs have just failed, if obese, you can think of bariatric surgery. If lean, you can think of insulin, you can think of GLP-1. If somebody has recurrent hypoglycemia, you can choose a drug which does not produce hypoglycemia, and there is a compelling need to prevent hypoglycemia. You can choose DPP-4s, SGLT2s, GLP-1s, maybe modern insulins. Of course, you have organ-specific considerations. If your patient has fatty liver disease, there are studies on pioglitazone with fatty liver disease. There are studies of incretin-based therapies. There are studies on SGLT2s as well. And we today know that fatty liver also responds very well to a low-carb diet because the glycogen stores, once the glycogen stores are full, the glucose is converted through de novo lipogenesis into fat in the liver, which is just exported to fatty pancreas and fatty heart, epicardial fat, so on and so forth. If somebody has coronary artery disease, you might like to choose a particular therapy that is an organ-specific consideration. Chronic kidney disease you can look at SGLT2 inhibitors. The point I'm trying to make is that precision medicine is not some glorified thing that we can't treat, that you need some expensive center for precision medicine to do some genetic tests. I think by looking at the patient's age, comorbidities, clinical factors, complications, organ system involvement, you and I can practice this form of medicine as precisely as we can. And India is a country where cost is a big consideration. And I think all of us should think of how we can maximize our history, examination, and basic tests to actually clinically judge. And I think it's only in the first few patients that you'll have to think. Once you see your first 100 patients, it'll automatically come to you whether you want to use X or Y. A word about diet. We know that there is a low-carb diet. We know that there is a vegan diet. We know that there is a keto diet. Lots of diets are the low-calorie diet. Which diet is suitable for which person? Each group claims superiority of their diet. I think in the future, when artificial intelligence is used, when you use phenotypes, genotypes, when we assess the social media aspects, the behavioral aspect, all this will come together one day and tell us that this patient will respond to this diet. But till then, we'll have to use our own good precision medicine, which is our cortex, the little gray cells, as Hercule Poirot in Agatha Christie book says. So I'd like to summarize by asking you to remember Harry Potter's sorting hat, in which children wear a hat which talks to them and they are sorted into different groups. To say that type 2 diabetes is now, you can think of clustering your patients into different groups and choosing therapies based on the patient. I've also shown you that type 2 diabetes is not type 2 diabetes, but it's a heterogeneous group of so many diseases, and some of them require aggressive treatment, but some of them may not require that kind of an aggressive treatment. I showed you the example of modern times where technology is transforming, but is it transforming things for the better? They say that in Japan, they use robots for elderly care, and robots also give artificial empathy. Can empathy be artificial? People say that robots can give artificial empathy, but I want to ask you, is our empathy always true or is it artificial? If you have a busy OPD and you're seeing your 150th patient of the day, you will have to show empathy, but inside you have compassion fatigue. So empathy, what the robot gives, may be artificial, but empathy which we give may also be sometimes artificial. So I think in future, is our job going to be taken away by robots? This was asked by the chief guest. I don't think our doctor's job is going to be taken over by robots. As long as we have the warmth and the human affection, doctors, medicine will still survive. Yes, some professions which depend on repeated uh, automatic tasks may be at risk. For example, anatomic radiology, certain forms of histology, anatomic histology, these may be at risk of taking over by artificial intelligence. But we doctors, we don't have to worry. Artificial intelligence is not after our jobs. But I want to say that a doctor who can harness artificial intelligence, a good clinician who can harness artificial intelligence to make decisions may be better than a good clinician who doesn't know how to access artificial intelligence. I also talked about the extreme precision medicine where you personalize treatment, and I showed you one of my patients who did well on sulfonylurea as a newborn with diabetes. I talked about that. I also talked about looking at non-glycemic aspects. Age of the patient, is it an elderly patient? Is he or she staying alone? Is he or she at risk of hypoglycemia? Looking at those characteristics, then setting the glycemic goal and then choosing the tablet. I also talked about organ-specific considerations where you can look at the liver disease or heart disease and then choose therapies. And the gist of all this is that, friends, we can practice precision medicine sitting in our little OPD, busy OPD, in our own little diabetes clinics and do the best for our patients. We don't need some esoteric genetic test. All we require is a little bit of common sense, a little bit understanding of the evidence, and of course, empathy for the patient. Thank you so much for listening to me. It's a pleasure talking to you.